And welcome to the Ticker.com's news channel on YouTube. On this channel, we review stock markets and discuss financial news, market trends, and economic data from Wall Street to Global Street. So let's dive in. We begin our review of the global economy with the key releases in the US, Europe, China, Japan, and India. Investors shifted their focus this week to inflation from the labor market last week. Investors bid up stocks on Friday after a weaker than expected increase in producer price inflation softened the worries about consumer price inflation accelerated in the December. In Europe, investors also added stocks after European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde said harsh phase of the fight against inflation is most likely over. Lagarde added that the central bank is prepared to lower rates if inflation is on a sustainable path towards the 2% level. Germany also reported that the international trade surplus increased to a 3-year high in November after imports fell and exports rose to EU member states, China, and the UK. In Asia, the stock market diverged and the Nikkei index soared to a 34-year high after the policymakers pushed back against the hopes of ending ultra-loose monetary policy soon. Elsewhere, China said exports rose unexpectedly in December, but 2023 exports, imports, and trade surplus declined. Despite the decline in total exports in 2023, China sharply expanded its shipment of electrical vehicles, solar cells and panels, and lithium-ion batteries. In other economic news, China's consumer prices and producer prices declined, Japan's current account surplus rose, the French trade deficit shrank, and French inflation was confirmed at 3.7%. India's retail inflation rose in December and benchmark indices continue to advance in 2024 on the prospect of strong economic growth driven by sustained government investment in infrastructure. Let us review key events in global bond and commodities market last week. The yield on the 10-year U.S. Treasury eased to a 3.9% after softer producer price inflation eased worries after consumer price inflation edged higher in the previous month. Gold traded around $2,050 an ounce after cooler producer price inflation renewed the bets that the Federal Reserve may lower interest rates sooner than expected. WTI crude oil prices traded above $75 a barrel after the U.S. and U.K. carried out military strikes on areas controlled by Houthi rebels in Yemen, raising concerns that crude oil supplies may be disrupted. The natural gas futures prices in Europe decreased 8% to 31 euros per megawatt hour after a prolonged mild winter in Europe, despite the recent cold snap, which led to reduced consumption of natural gas and lower overall demand amid ample supplies. The euro hovered at $1.10 after the traders digested the latest economic bulletin by the European Central Bank and lowered expectations that the U.S. Federal Reserve will begin to lower rates anytime soon. The yen traded above 145 against the dollar after policymakers pushed back the idea that the Bank of Japan would raise interest rates soon. The S&P 500 index and the Nasdaq Composite extended weekly gains after choppy trading as investors digested inflation data and recalibrated the interest rate path outlook and resumed a 10-week rally after closing down in the previous week. European markets rebounded after the European Central Bank President Lagarde said the hardest and the worst bit fight against inflation was behind, and the central bank was prepared to lower interest rates if inflation was on a sustainable path towards 2%. The Nikkei 225 resumed its advance in Tokyo and hit a 34-year high after policymakers pushed back against the prospect of a rate hike in the near future, citing weak wage growth. China market indices continued their slide after consumer price inflation declined for the third month in a row in December. And the international trade surplus unexpectedly rose in December after exports advanced faster than imports. India market indices extended weekly gains following better than expected earnings for tech service exporters, and after the close on Friday, consumer inflation rose to a 4-month high in December. We now review the latest merger deals, corporate news, and several retail and transportation companies were in focus. Hewlett-Packard Enterprise agreed to acquire Juniper Network for $40 a share, or about $14 billion in an all-cash deal. JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup, and Bank of America reported a sharp decline in earnings after taking hefty charges linked to last year's regional bank crisis. Wells Fargo earnings advanced on cost-cutting and were supported by higher interest rates. Delta Airlines said quarterly earnings more than doubled, but lowered its 2000 earnings outlook, citing growing macroeconomic uncertainties. Bitcoin-linked stocks rose after the SEC approved the launch of spot Bitcoin ETFs. Boeing Company was in focus after the FAA temporarily grounded all 737 MAX 9 aircraft after a door blew off midair on an Alaska air flight. Airbus reported record aviation airplane orders driven by large orders from India-based Indigo and Air India and additional orders by Turkish Airlines. Lennar Corporation hiked its annual dividend, and the company's board approved $5 billion stock repurchase plan. Intuitive Surgical, the robotic surgery equipment maker, reported a stronger-than-expected fourth-quarter outlook. JetBlue Airways appointed a new chief effective February 12. Unity Software said it plans to lay off about 25% or 1,800 of its workforce as a part of the company's restructuring plan. Suzuki, Japan-based vehicle maker, said it plans to double its vehicle manufacturing capacity in India over the next 7 years. TCS, Infosys, Wipro, and HCL, tech services exporters from India, reported mixed quarterly results and steady sales amid global economic uncertainties. Looking ahead to the next week, economic news and corporate earnings are expected to keep investors busy. In the U.S., economists are looking ahead to the release of retail sales and industrial production data. Earnings season enters the second week, and investors looking forward to results from Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, U.S. Bancorp, and PSG Bank. In Europe, investors are looking ahead to the release of the UK's inflation, retail sales, and jobs report, and Germany's GDP data for 2023. In Asia, China's fourth-quarter GDP, retail sales, industrial production, investment data, and unemployment rate will be in focus. India is scheduled to release its international trade and wholesale inflation rate this week. Investors in Japan are scheduled to review reports on consumer inflation, Tankan's index, and machinery orders. You can review daily U.S. and global financial market news, earnings releases, latest SEC filings, stock movers, and economic updates on ticker.com and 123jump.com. You can also get the latest financial books on Rodera.com and keep up with financial industry events on eventsinamerica.com. That is all for today, and we will see you next week.